Play Saves the World, Episode 7. Book Vibes. It's all the game. Hello and welcome everybody to Play Saves the World, the ongoing conversation about the meaning of play for human flourishing. My name is Daniel Hilty.
And my name is Kevin Taylor.
And we are so grateful that you have decided to join our podcast today. Thank you so much for listening and clicking the button and being a part of our conversation. It's great to have you here. And
we don't know you, but we love you.
We don't know you, but we love you. That's a good motto. I like that.
You like that?
I like that. We should get t-shirts on that. Kevin, how are you? It's good to see you.
I think we're getting some lag here. You okay?
I think so. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't hear your response. But we seem to be live now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Are you doing okay? All's good in your life, in your world?
Yeah, I'm good, Daniel. Thanks. How are you?
Good. I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Dealing with a little lag. We got some dogs back here in Missouri, but anyway. So today we are talking about a book. This is, I think, our first Book Vibes Book Club episode since we've rebranded to, that's right, Play Saves the World, as demonstrated by Kevin. For those of you who are watching on video, we're talking about a book called It's All a Game.
It's All a Game.
By an author named Tristan Donovan. Donovan, published in 2017 by Thomas Dunn Books. And Kevin, how would you describe this book?
I would describe it as kind of a history of board games. And it's historical, but it's quick, it's light, it's not real heavy or footnote. There's no footnotes exactly, or there are no footnotes. There's, I think, some endnotes maybe.
Maybe some endnotes, yeah.
Yeah, but, it trips along pretty quickly. It's interesting. You get to learn some great stories, great bits, and each chapter is basically about an important game in the history of modern gaming. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. Yeah. And it's not every chapter is kind of its own kind of self-contained unit, taking a look at a history of a particular game.
Yeah, you can read it just individually.
Yeah. Some nice little. Obviously, a lot of research went into the book.
Mm-hmm.
It did a lot of primary research. Like that struck me in reading it, that he interviewed various folks and went to the source in a lot of instances. So yeah, an interesting read, a lot of interesting anecdotes in it. Absolutely,
highly recommended.
Yeah. So, he starts off by talking a little bit about kind of the ancient history of games, oh no! Can you all hear, Kevin? Can you hear this? What's going on?
There's a dog fight.
Our dogs are fighting. Yeah, in the background.
Dog play.
I'm sorry, dog play. It's all a game for dogs, and they're fighting. So maybe
nice.
I'll take them out of the studio. I'm sorry. Just a moment.
Yes.
Fun fact: the dogs are often in the studio when I record, and have always been quiet heretofore, but decided to fight today. So sorry.
Wrestle.
To wrestle. I have a friend who calls them like, what do they call it? Like the zips. The dogs get the zips. What do they when they just kind of, when they decide to battle each other?
I don't know.
No. Okay. Don't know a term for that.
I don't get that. I think of zip lines or zip ties. I think of zip codes. I think of being zippy, but I don't.
Maybe it could be zippy.
Zipper, but I don't think of dogs sort of wrestling.
No. This is also why Kevin and I have to record many states away, because when we're in the same room, we also spontaneously start wrestling too. So it's
That's right.
and then it ruins the episode. So
And then Kristen makes us leave.
that's right. That's right.
That's right.
So in the so early on in the book, he talks about some of the more ancient history of games, and this is something we've talked about before, Kevin, you and I, in the earlier iteration of this podcast. It was more focused specifically on board games, but this idea really the board games and getting people to gather around a flat surface to play together really has been around in some form since the dawn of civilization. That games are an essential part of human history.
That's right. Yeah, the ancient world shows games and knowledge and love of games insofar as artifacts have survived. And even some games that we don't know how to play because they didn't really have paper and they didn't have rule books. Or if they did, they are gone. But I doubt they ever had them. It was probably more oral culture, people teaching each other. So we have the boards and the games, but we don't know how they are played, which is very cool.
Right.
Very authentic.
Then there are some ancient games that are still around today. Things like backgammon, chess, parcheesi, mancala. Mm-hmm. And so when you play them, you're kind of really experiencing something that in some form has been around a very long time. Are you familiar with any or all of those ancient games, Kevin? Any that are a regular part of your life today?
No. I mean, I have played backgammon and chess, and my kids have played mancala some, but I actually never learned it. So, yeah. How about you?
I think I've played all four of the ones that we mentioned. I guess there are others as well. Backgammon probably the most. Actually, we have, my wife and I have kind of come to enjoy a two-player, a phone app of two-player games that whenever we go out to a restaurant, now that we're empty nesters, we're just the two of us, and we'll put my phone in the middle of the table and play these. It's a library of two-player games that you can play on your phone as you're waiting for the food to come. And it recently has added parcheesi, which I think it calls Ludo, and mancala. And so we've rediscovered those two games through this through the phone app. Anyway, yeah, so
that's cool.
It's kind of fun.
Yes. But what we're interested in is modern board games, primarily.
Yeah.
Right. With the exception of what you just said, of a ancient game on a modern piece of technology known as a pahony, a cell pahony.
Cell pahony. That's right.
Or some countries call mobile pahony.
Mobile pahone. That's right.
Mobile pahone. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. But, I'm in awe of your.
I know. Yeah.
Your polyglottism there. You're just, that's great. That's fantastic.
I think it's pronounced polyglottism. I think it's the more authentic pronunciation. But yeah, one of the things that we noticed with this book is that culture really shapes how we play, that these games reflect our cultural interests and prejudices. And that of course they are a product of culture, which isn't a surprise because our books, I mean, obviously Victorian books are all about Victorian society and we like reading them, but they don't reflect our society today. We're not, spending an entire book wondering who Lady Lancelot's going to marry or something like that.
Right.
So
right.
It's not a Stephen King plot as far as I know. But yeah, he mentioned some really important games that reflect some, cultural times. So what were some of those that struck you?
Yeah. I this seemed especially a salient point for him in the chapter about the game of life. Much beloved, very popular game, the game of life. Been around a long time. It's chapter 4 in the book. And I, by way of segue, last week, in our last episode, our guest, Dr. Rachel Cowart, she talked about going out to buy the game of life for her to play with her child, and discovering that it had changed a lot. And as it turns out, this is something that has been true throughout the history of the game of life. And the author Tristan Donovan, really kind of details this in chapter 4. But the game of life, in particular, has changed much over its history to reflect the cultural norms and expectations of American society. He also goes into the origins of it, the sources of the game of life, which I thought was interesting. That there was this game called the Mansion of Happiness originally, which was meant to teach virtue to children, and I don't know if I should say by all accounts, but at least by the accounts that I've read, it doesn't seem like it was terribly fun by modern standards, but much more interested in being didactic.
Fortunately, that was my great grandfather that invented that. So thank you, Daniel.
Oh no, Kevin, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I feel so bad now.
Oh, yeah, I know. Your old peg leg Taylor came back from the Civil War, made a game, and Daniel doesn't like it.
I'm sorry. I should have. I need to tame my tongue.
Yeah. Yes.
But I guess so. Then this gentleman named Milton Bradley, like there was an actual gentleman named Milton Bradley,
which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because why else would you name a company that strange name?
No, I always assumed it was maybe the name of the two primary investors,
right.
like Mrs. Milton and Mr. Bradley, or something like that. But
right.
No, there was a person named Milton Bradley, who, did you catch this, was Methodist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Which happens to be a tradition that Kevin and I are familiar with. Anyway, yes. So he decided he was going to make something like this Mansion of Happiness to teach virtue to children, maybe like through a Sunday school hour. He made the Checkered Game of Life, which was the name of his take on it. And eventually, through the history of the Milton Bradley Company, a later redesign became the Game of Life as we know it, with the little pegs and the cars, pink pegs, blue pegs, deciding to go into career right away or going to college, and how the evolution of that game over the years really has reflected changing culture, including, did you catch this, that in the early games there was a uranium spot? Like you could strike it rich with uranium.
No, I missed that bit.
Yeah,
gosh, that's too funny.
Yeah, so at one point thinking, I guess there was some time in American history where the dream was to strike it rich with uranium. I guess this might have been before your grandfather or after your grandfather who invented the Mansion of Happiness.
It was after.
Okay.
Yes. He did have a uranium peg leg, which was ultimately not a good idea, but it was experimental.
Tragic tale.
Tragic tale. We don't talk about it much. Yeah, no, culture obviously shapes games, and it's so interesting to think about the different games that have reflected, say, colonialism or Monopoly, and the questions around capitalism and market forces, because Monopoly was originally one part of a two-part game that was questioning the role of real estate and capitalism in creating poor people, or creating poverty, I should say, that is partly the condition of the poor. So, we see culture shaping that. The book tells that story of Monopoly. It also tells the story towards the end, very interesting, about the game Pandemic.
Yeah.
Which originally was a response to the bird flu, the avian bird flu. And that was what inspired that guy to make the game. But of course, we would associate it with the recent, COVID pandemic. But lots of similar stuff if you played the game, reminding you of CDC and traveling around and hotspots and outbreaks, and those sorts of themes were things that Matt Leacock had imagined that the bird flu could have done. And that's something that people 100 years ago would not have imagined, either a global pandemic fueled by global travel
Right,
or
right,
a global team of folks trying to research and end a pandemic.
right, right.
And yeah, and although the game pandemic actually ends with cures, and we didn't get cures so much as vaccines that mitigate the disease, and also the disease evolved to where it's now not nearly as fatal, or rarely fatal, I'd almost say. But yeah, but still, like, that's a cultural phenomenon that would have made no sense 100 years ago to
Yeah,
make a game
yeah.
about a global pandemic. They obviously had plagues and things, but I guess more than 100 years ago, they had Spanish flu and the people were traveling, so that it was getting around. So maybe going back 150 years or whatever. Pick a number, Daniel. So, but yeah, culture influences things.
147.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Perfect. Well done. Thank you, caller. Yeah, and it also reflects the idea that science can research. You know, there's an optimism there that given enough time, we can find something that will help.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would have been
I like that.
unthinkable 200 years ago.
Right, right.
So
It makes me wonder: are there games that do not reflect the culture out of which they come, that are not shaped by culture? And I guess I first go to like abstract games, like
yeah, maybe an
checkers or things like
abstract
that.
game or a mathematical game.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, chess is, I guess it is coming out of war, and you've got some elements of it, but
Mm-hmm.
and there's some reasons why you have a bishop, you know, why they're called what they're called, but it's, you don't need to know why it's called a bishop to just learn how it moves. So I guess
Right, right.
I guess I'd say everything comes out of a culture, but it may be really thin, the layer of culture. But yeah, an abstract game might be. I'm trying to think of what's the tile laying game where you're building like a tapestry for the
Azul?
Azul. Yeah, but even that's got a theme of like a
Right.
decorating a mosque or something
Right,
Arabic.
right, right.
But if you didn't know that, it wouldn't matter, would
In
it?
Portugal, I think it was maybe.
Portugal. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It strikes me. It reminds me of something he discusses in a different chapter, on the chapter on Euro games, which we'll get to in a little bit. But you know how after World War II, many of the modern hobby board games, the first modern hobby board games coming out of Germany, you know, were very were much less anti player elimination, right? Kind of anti-war, which was a reflection of what was going on culturally, right? Whereas many of the games before that point would be about, I'm going to destroy my opponent. The games after World War II, especially coming out of Germany, much less so, more about who can use limited resources most efficiently, kind of, which I think that would be a cultural reflection.
Absolutely. No, you're definitely right. The appetite for elimination was reduced after the horrors of the World War. So yeah. And also even D&D is a reflection of Tolkien, that it's really a Tolkien reskin of wargaming. Interestingly enough, it's where D&D evolves, but that's why it has the creatures it has, is they like Tolkien. So without Tolkien's cultural influence, there was no D&D. It would have just been, they're really making recreation of war battling. It was wargaming.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So that's a great chapter. Yeah, that's really interesting. Started war planning, I think, out of Prussia, were some of the Prussian militaries the first to use games for modeling battles.
Okay.
And then it developed into a hobby in England, and famously H.G. Wells wrote a book about it. But it used to be the gaming would take up a whole room with kind of these 2-inch, or I think that's 16 millimeters figurines. Could be a kilometer.
I think we're talking, kilometers there.
Kilometer, maybe a kilometer or two size, which is roughly like 2 inches. I think
that's right. That's right.
Something like that. It's roughly, it's base 10, I think.
I think that's very accurate. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. But they'd have these little figures, and they would have basically it was these models, and you would have a referee to referee the war game. And this was
Interesting.
for fun. This was no longer generals doing it as the Prussians were. These were simply hobbyists. And so H.G. Wells wrote a book of how to do it. But that referee that would referee it for that day or a couple days and decide, okay, this can instruct these guys, and they were recreating Napoleon's battles and those sorts of things. Eventually that descended into tabletop wargaming, and then somebody said, hey, why don't we reskin this with Tolkien characters? And at that point, the referee had become a master of the game, and that's how we got a dungeon master. The idea of a guy, someone who's running the game.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, it all came out of wargaming and Tolkien, really.
So that's
Now you don't see, well, you see some of the Tolkien, but less so now. And it, because it's become its own mythology, I think, D&D. But you
Powerful.
definitely don't see the wargaming.
yeah.
And it's not adversarial so much.
These are powerful examples of
Culture, yeah.
culture creating game or influencing play.
Randomness of history, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's interesting. So, are there example? I've been trying to think of other examples of the opposite direction of play influencing culture.
Well, the wargaming did influence battles and military strategy.
Right.
In fact, there was a recent video, and I'll put a link to this from the People Make Games folks that we're big fans of on YouTube. And that was about, I think England has a center for gaming to help with military strategy.
Really interesting.
Yeah, like they're actively trying to recruit folks to either around cybersecurity or other things, because if you can think like a game, then you can solve real problems.
Okay.
So, I don't know. Do you think of things?
I think I don't know. I'm trying to think. I mean, as we think of play broadly, beyond just games, but things like music or art or cinema. I mean, I guess I would say that play influences culture then to a great extent. I guess right. As we're recording this right now, the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, is huge. It's massive. That's kind of it's people around the world are talking about, and that's music is in the realm of play, and that certainly seems to be a cultural phenomenon that's shaping us. I'm trying to think
Changing
kind of
economies, yeah.
broader question. Yeah, like does it shape the way a culture? I'm trying to think of an example of play shaping the way a culture thinks or acts or relates to each other.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I do think of D&D influencing culture. We've got a movie, the D&D movie, which is really good. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And so the idea of role play has we've gone from games to cultural. We've got a Clue type movie with the glass onion. So that's become a staple of the genre of a whodunit. And I guess that probably predates Clue, to be honest. I don't know. They probably mutually fed each other, but the stock characters, I think, are very Clue-like. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a stellar segue to another chapter and takeaway from this book.
It's just how I planned it.
You're so good. You're so good, Kevin.
That's not true.
This is like a pro. It's like, speaking of Taylor Swift, it's like I'm singing a little campfire song with my little ukulele, and then in walks Taylor Swift. That's how you are with segues.
That's
You're
me.
a segue. You're the Taylor Swift of segues. Anyway, that's very good. I don't
Thank
know a
you.
Taylor
That's my
Swift
Taylor
song.
Swift.
I'm afraid. I don't.
You don't. She's
no.
great. She's very listenable. I mean, I don't just put it on, and I can't tell you what they're about, but I always enjoy listening to it. So I think she's super talented. And she's a smart business person too.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's
hats off.
Phenomenal what she has done. Yeah, it's
my teenage boys like to hate on her because all the teenage girls love her so much. And I'm like, dude, don't let your gender prejudice at that age obscure the fact that Taylor Swift is amazing.
She is. Yes. Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
But yeah, you mentioned Clue. There's another
Mm-hmm.
chapter devoted to Clue in this book, chapter
Mm-hmm.
8, or Cluedo, as it is
Right.
called outside of the United States. And I think one takeaway from that chapter is that a play can help us to manage our fears in a couple ways. I think is Clue or Cluedo an example of that. For one thing, talks about how Clue was
Mm-hmm.
born during World War II, during um, the bombing of the bombing runs of Nazi bombers during World War II over the United Kingdom. There was this
Mm-hmm.
gentleman named Anthony Pratt who had poor eyesight, was not able to serve, and 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 decided to during this kind of very bleak time, desperate time in the UK, to maybe try to address some of that, bring a little bit of a distraction or happiness
Mm-hmm.
by creating a board game.
Oh, such a great story.
Yeah, yeah, and so came up with Clue, and so that's one respect in which play helps to manage fears or difficult times. By the way, sidebar, that is also the story of how crossword puzzles came to the New York Times. Have you heard this story as well?
No.
Yeah, famously. The New York Times ran an op-ed or an editorial piece during the height of the initial height of crossword popularity. This is before World War II, where they said the New York Times will never. I'm paraphrasing, but that the New York Times will never run a crossword, will never have a crossword, because I think it was described as sinful and
Nice.
waste of time, and a serious person wouldn't do this, and a serious
Right.
newspaper wouldn't run it. Then during World War II, I forget her name now, but a woman who was the crossword editor for another newspaper wrote a note to one of the editors of the New York Times and said, "Surely you will concede now." And again, I'm paraphrasing that that there is some value in in crosswords. That during this time
Mm.
when things are so bleak and so desperate in the world, what could be a greater service than this kind of little bit of daily distraction or joy that you can bring to people's lives?
Right.
And she convinced them, and they hired her, and she was the New York Times first crossword editor and remained in that position for a number of
Wow.
years.
Now a gold standard.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
crossword puzzles, as well as the New York Times pushes their whole game section a lot with Wordle and
Yeah.
things. So, boy, is that
It's
ironic
core to who
that
they
were
are now.
such
Yeah.
snobs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It also reminds me of the opening of the book that I'm forgetting that's about gaming. Reality is Broken. She starts with
Oh,
an ancient story of from ancient Greece, but I forget which people it was. But
yeah.
there's a story of a people in ancient Greece that to survive a famine, they'd eat one day and then play a game the other day.
Yes, was this the Kingdom of Lydia? I think it
It was
was.
the Kingdom of
The-
Lydia. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah,
The
yeah.
Kingdom of Lydia. And of
Yeah.
course, this is sort of could be a tall tale. We don't know, but it's an
Sure,
ancient
sure.
story preserved that. Yeah, they use games to distract them during difficult times, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a great use of a game. Yeah, and I love that for the Brits in World War II, they were afraid they would die from the
Yes.
bombing,
Yep.
or if people they
Yep.
love, they would die. So let's play a game where people die, but in a
Right.
safe way, which is this murder mystery thing. It's not from bombs. So it gives you
Yeah.
a way to do your fears, but indirectly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Poking at the fears. Yeah. Yeah.
Poking at the
A-
fears in a safe way. Yeah. As
And
well
the
as,
fact that
as
it's.
you mentioned,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
you mentioned, back to the cultural bit, it's a very British thing to have these set murder mysteries. I mean, we tell them too, but I guess mostly because of Sherlock Holmes and the British influence of the Glass Onion type stories. Yeah, yeah, who
Right,
done it?
right.
Agatha Christie type thing. Yeah. Sorry, what
Yes,
were you gonna say?
yes. No, no, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, that ever since it was popularized by, yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes stories in
Hmm.
Victorian England, there's been this. I don't think. I hope it's not um, overgeneralizing or stereotyping to say um, a fascination or a high degree of popularity around murder mysteries, crime drama, especially in the United Kingdom.
Hmm.
It's kind of
Yeah, you're right. The TV shows are still, I mean, we do them well as well, but they have yeah, they've been doing it for decades.
yeah, yeah,
And they're
and
great.
born during
They're
this
great.
Victorian era, where things were
Hmm.
very restrained and prim and proper,
Hmm.
but yet if you could kind of poke at the seedy underside of society, um,
Right.
it seems like kind of a very proper Victorian thing to do, and it's a
Hmm.
way again of kind of poking at our fears of our mortality or the seedy underside of the world in which we live.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. Oh, so
so
good. So cool. So yeah, play is often helping us manage our fears, and it might be through humor or distraction or social anxiety. I mean, what a great way to break the ice with strangers is to play a game and get
yeah,
people engaged. So yeah, it overcomes all sorts of fears.
I think about that also with you're saying with pandemic, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that was a way of kind of poking at a fear that did become very much a reality for us, for the world.
Yeah, we were
Um,
playing Pandemic Season Zero, one of the legacy versions of the game during the pandemic outside. And I know that
yeah,
because I have a photo of us sitting
nice,
outside,
nice.
the family, in gloves and hats because we were still,
Yeah,
you
sure.
know, we didn't know if we were, this was before the vaccine.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
That'll
it
be
didn't
a
give us the creeps at all. We were like, okay, during the
right.
pandemic, let's play this game. Because again, a game is, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about a silly game is it's just a game. Like you put it in a box and put it on a shelf. It's not a threat.
Right,
There's
right.
no way a game can harm you. I guess unless the material, I can take that back. The material could be traumatizing, but in general, if the material is assuming it's not something that's, and there are some games that explore adult themes, but in general, a
Sure,
game is a
sure.
safe thing because it goes in a box,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's not that's not a real threat for an adult.
yeah.
Yeah.
It also gets me thinking about, there's a lot of games and other media around um, post-apocalyptic, the post-apocalyptic genre, right? And
Hmm.
and this idea of that's also kind of poking at the world's end, right?
Right.
The great cataclysm that's going to kind of end it all. And
Right.
there are
A
board
Mad
games
Max
also.
type thing.
Yeah, yeah. Also board games about um, ways of generating sustainable energy, right? And
Hmm.
and um, I think Matt, you mentioned Matt Leacock did Pandemic. I believe
Hmm.
his most recent game that's very popular right now is all about
Yeah,
um,
I'd like to play that.
kind of
Daybreak,
creating a sustainable
something like
model
that.
for society. Yeah, I forget the name of
Yeah,
it,
I think it's
but
Daybreak,
Daybreak. Yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
Yeah, he's a great designer.
yeah, yeah.
Some cool stuff. So, all right. Well, our third takeaway from this book, It's All a Game, and these are just highlights. There's so much more in this book. So there's a lot of great bits. It's really a collection of a series of essays. So these are just a few glimpses of things that we liked, but not, not necessarily the only or even, yes, definitely not the only major themes of the book, but there's a
Right,
lot going on here. But you highlighted, Daniel, that there's a lovely concept towards the end of the book that what is celebrated grows.
right, right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
unpack that a little.
Thanks.
How does what we recognize end up being something that flourishes?
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is in chapter 16, and it's a chapter in part about Catan, right? About what used to be called Settlers of Catan. but arguably, maybe not arguably, one of the small handful of games that really are foundational for the modern hobby game world. Yeah. We're talking about like Catan, Carcassonne, Pandemic, Ticket to Ride. And if there's more than those, I don't know.
I would include
be,
Risk. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly modern. I guess they're older. I guess you're right that when we think of post 80s, but 20th century, we would include Risk and Clue and Monopoly, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But
for our non board game fan listeners, within the board game world, it's not uncommon to speak of the age in which we are living as the golden age of board gaming, and I think that's also hard to argue with. They're just really very good, high quality, engaging, well thought out games coming out all the time.
Innovative games continue to be published even this year. So
yeah,
it's not over yet.
Yeah, and the reason, I think part of the argument that Tristan Donovan makes, or at least implies in this chapter on Catan, is that one reason we are living in such a time of such high quality games is because of this award called the Spiel des Jahres, which is German simply for Game of the Year. That Germany was the center, or at least a center, for many of these modern hobby board games. Carcassonne, Catan, both come out of Germany.
Right.
For
as you said earlier, what's distinctive and why we call them Euro games, because they're coming out of Europe, is they tend to feature less luck. They tend to feature neutral topics such as, building a farm or something like that.
Right.
Although Catan is about settling an island or series of islands, so that's maybe less neutral. But it also tends to not have a lot of there's no player elimination and there's not much direct conflict. So you end up having to slow down or do things that thwart your neighbor, but you can't actually take out their hit points directly or anything like that.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And
you have to have little meeples, and that's where that name comes from, little wooden things of people or something.
And there's a way to generally to keep players engaged to the end of the game. Not only because there's no player elimination, but also it's just a well thought out design. Whereas like, Monopoly, you may not be eliminated till the end of the game, but half an hour into the game that you've just checked out. There's no way you're going to win.
Right.
And
so Euros usually win by victory points almost inevitably. So that's a joke in our family. Like, the win condition for this game is, wait for it, victory points. And they're like, oh, shocker, points. Because if you're not eliminating people, then the winner's determined by points.
Yeah. There's so many board game instructional videos online that end with, and the player with the most points is the winner of the game at the end of the game. Yeah. But so I think part of the argument that is implied in here and that we see elsewhere is that, so Catan won this award, the Spiel des Jahres. This was an award, and I failed to write down the year in which it started. I'm sorry, but late 20th century, some mid around the 70s or 80s. This award, Spiel des Jahres, was created to recognize excellence in board gaming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it has grown and grown and grown. The Spiel des Jahres. It is one of the biggest events, maybe the biggest event in board gaming every year in the world. Happens in Essen, Germany, every year.
Mm-hmm. Which started in a college dorm, I think.
Did it start in a college dorm? I missed that.
Or college setting, yeah.
Nice.
The convention originally started with college kids.
Nice. Oh, cool. I think the argument goes that the reason we are living in at a time of such high quality games is because we have this award for it, right? We recognize it, and what we celebrate good games today. We shine a light on them. We recognize them, and what we celebrate grows, right? And what we pay attention to grows, which is, yeah, a good philosophy in many things in life. That's
Yeah.
a spiritual principle as well. That what we Buddhism talks about the seeds that we shine a light on grows. Jesus talks about the seeds that we make sure have good soil grows, right, and the seeds that have bad soil don't, right. But the thing, what we pay attention to, what we water, what we shine a light on, what we nourish, grows.
Yeah.
And I think that's a nice principle to take from that. Yeah.
No, it is. I'm a bullet journal guy, and sort of the classic method. There's lots of varieties or home brews for a bullet journal system, but what's recommended by its creator, Ryder Carroll, one of the nice bits is you're jotting down thoughts, appointments, and to-do lists for the day, which is a nice way of both keeping track of what you need to do, but also just remembering when you look in the future, when you look back. And especially when you see what you were worried about and those things maybe dissolved. So it gives you nice perspective. But one of the nice bits he does too is for that day, you should give that day a title, like the most important thing that happened that day.
Interesting.
And then you have a page for your month. And for each day, you transcribe that title. And so you can look at this page of the title for every day of the month, right?
Wow.
And then you can get a feel for the whole month. Like, wow, I was really depressed this month, or wow, I had a lot of good moments at work, or I seem to really enjoy hanging out with the friends at the pub.
Yeah.
So maybe I should do more of that, or maybe I'm doing too much of it, and I'm you can draw conclusions, but the point is to kind of celebrate, maybe for good or for ill. You might recognize a problem, such as I'm too stressed or something, but what you celebrate gives you a chance to grow or prune or adapt or just learn something about yourself. Because golly, I can't remember 2 months ago, or even think back to the beginning of this month. It gets hazy. The old human brain is a strange critter, and so quickly we get anxious about the past and the future, but then we can't really remember it very well. Right?
That's so true.
You obsess over something you said to someone 5 years ago, but you can't remember the larger theme of the year.
Right.
So, I really enjoy that. If anyone, and just go on YouTube and look up Bullet Journal, Ryder Carroll, and you can use any notebook for it, but it's a really nice.
How's that spelled, his name? Or Ryder?
Yeah, it's a very odd name. Ryder, first name, and it's a man. Last name Carroll, Carroll.
Okay, thanks.
So called bullet journaling or bujo. Sometimes it's short.
Okay.
It's made as a shortcut, and he's got some books and things. But the nice bit too is you can use any piece of paper you want. They sell their own notebook, but you don't have to use it. You just need paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so cool. May I ask, not to put you on the spot, what are some examples of is there any surprise that you have learned or discovered, or patterns that you have found interesting in doing a bullet journal?
That's a good one. One that I really was interested to learn is, you and I are both obsessed with board games, and I really got into solo board gaming for a bit, but I realized with a bullet journal that I wasn't enjoying it because it was making me feel lonely. Like I didn't have enough social activity in my life, and then I'd get a solo game and I would want to play it, but while that was rewarding, I needed to be socializing more.
Okay.
Right? And so I could look back and I could see, the things I titled the day was not always playing this new solo game or replaying a solo version of a game, but it was having lunch with somebody or going to trivia night at the brewery here.
Nice.
Which we got second place last time.
Congratulations.
So, I'm awesome. Like, solo gaming's cool and I love games, but I don't love them enough to play them till I'm miserable.
Yeah.
But there's something in me that, I know I shouldn't say miserable, but I just realized this isn't working how I thought it was.
Yeah.
But solo games are
That's cool.
cool and they work for a lot of people, and I love to check it out, and it's a nice thing, but I'd almost rather not play a game than play a solo game if it's going to make me feel like, so.
I
'Cause I
can
like
see.
the banter, I like the energy, and yeah,
Right.
it's hard to table talk.
I could see how a bullet journal would really help you to get a sense of
Yeah,
it's doing what we're talking about. It's shining a light on the things that
shining a light, and
are important
we're
to
not
you.
always honest with ourselves, or we forget for
Yeah.
whatever reason. So yeah, looking back and like, this is not. I'm not celebrating actually what I thought it was.
I'm going to look that up. Thanks for recommending that.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually, it's not for everyone, but I find it immensely valuable.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. That's cool. Well, speaking of board games, um, well, I guess we should say so. So that is, it's all a game by
Mm-hmm.
Tristan Donovan. That's our take on it. I Kevin, I was wondering, just because we're talking about a book about board games, maybe we could end by just talking about a couple games we're playing right now. What are we playing now? What are we interested in? But before we do that, is there anything else you wanted to say about It's All a Game before we wrap up that discussion?
Except for you're awesome. No, I'm done.
Yes.
That's the last page.
Check out the book. Yeah, that's right.
P.S.
That's right.
Daniel is awesome.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Tristan Donovan was being awesome.
No, I'm talking about you. Tristan Donovan mentions you. You didn't read that page?
I don't deserve such praise. But thank you.
Tristan thinks so, Daniel.
I'm riding your coattails. But yeah, what would so
I had a great game of Trio, which is a game you turned me on to, a really light rules card game, but really hard and just hilarious and funny because it's like this weird Go Fish memory game. Like you're trying to find 3 sets of 3 cards, and you're not going to remember where you saw them, and and you know what someone's looking for, and that was just great. I really enjoyed that.
That's
and
great.
I finally got to play the campaign version of Arcs twice.
Nice.
And that is really interesting.
Nice.
It's a just very touted game of the year, and
yeah,
the campaign version, you play these characters and it just gets weirder and weirder, and you can change characters. It's like your guy has a different story arc. So you start out as the warmonger and then you become the pacifist. But however far you got in the first part of the first character stays around.
Okay.
So it alters the common deck, but your own deck.
Okay.
And so you end up with hybrid characters that are really interesting. There's like 20 some characters. Yeah.
Sounds so good.
It's good. It's hard. It's weird. You probably wouldn't like it because it's mean. Like you do end up having to attack and steal things from people.
Okay.
And I know that's not something you enjoy. Maybe with me, where I'm telling you, attack me, Daniel, you'll be okay. But it's a kind of a mean game, but you just know that. And, hey, if you lose, you lose.
Right. I wouldn't mind playing with you sometime. Given the fact
I love it.
that, yeah. Since we break out in wrestling matches anyway.
That's right. We'd have to stop the wrestling match. The hard bit with Arcs is there's a base game and then the campaign, and you really have to play the base game a time or two to get the fundamentals down, because then the campaign messes with all that.
Okay.
And it's a lot to try to absorb. That's the one thing with Arcs, why they broke it into 2 games. But
so you have to
campaign
buy
game
both.
is where it's at.
You have to buy both sets probably then, right?
You would. The base game is great and you'll like it. It's worth it. But but once you play the campaign game, you're not going to want to play the base game because it's just so interesting and cool.
Okay.
Anyway, what about you?
So interesting. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great recommendation. Yeah. Well, first of all, I love Trio. I'm so glad you mentioned that. But I won't tell you more about that. But I just love that game. I got a couple games recently that I'm enjoying. Harmonies is a game that seems to be getting a lot of love right now, and I'm enjoying that. We played that at our church game group last night.
Okay.
It's good. It's a kind of a tile placement game, which is one of my favorite mechanisms, except they're these good chunky wooden tiles, and you're building up a habitat and trying to place animals in the right place to get in the right habitat. It's really, and it's a beautiful game. It's one of those games where you have this little kind of wooden map. When you're done, you look at it, and it looks cool, right? Like
Okay.
a guest from a long time ago on our show said, Adrian Adamescu, who says this, look at what I've made. You know, it feels like
Yes,
one of those kind of games, which is really fun.
Creator of Sagrada, which is
Yes,
definitely that kind
yes.
of game.
I enjoy Harmonies very much. But the other game that we got, I think it's just I've been surprised how much I like. I knew I'd like Harmonies, but I really, really like this other game, Forest Shuffle. Forest Shuffle. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's just
I haven't played it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
It is a delightful game. It's a delightful game. It's a game where kind of similar theme. You're planting a forest, and then there are different animal and plant life that kind of take up residence around your forest. But it's all done with a deck of cards, and so you tuck these cards underneath the trees. Certain cards are trees. You're planting trees, but then you can tuck there's a deer that goes under the left side of the tree, and a raccoon that goes under the right side of the tree, and they each score based on unique qualities. And I love that. I like card tucking games. So
Mostly because it's so easy to clean up. You just smash them all together.
so easy to clean up. It's I guess it's kind of like the card version of tile placement. You're just kind of
Right.
yeah.
Chuck it all. Yeah.
It's super easy to clean up. So I really like Forest Shuffle.
That's cool.
It's fun. Yeah.
Wow. Yay. Games are great.
So
How can people find us, Daniel?
people can find us at playsavestheworld.org. We would love to have you visit us there. Or they can email us at playsavestheworld@gmail.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, things like that.
Yep. We'd love to hear from you.
We'd love to hear from you. Please join
Goodbye,
us
friends.
next time as we explore more play stuff.
That's right. Until then, bye.